We know the Bible says the giants returned after the flood, but I've always had this nagging question. If monsters were roaming around Canaan, wouldn't the neighbors have noticed? Skeptics say the Bible made this up, but then I found this. It's a military survival guide written by an Egyptian scribe in 1250 BCE. And right here, he warns his soldiers about a mountain pass in Canaan where dangerous warriors are 4 to 5 cubits tall with wild faces. That is 7 to 5 feet of pure muscle. This isn't a myth, it's an enemy intel report confirming exactly what the Israelites saw in the Bible. And not just that, these giants were spotted in the very same place as the biblical account. And there's more. Look at the dates of the sightings by the Egyptians. Egypt and Israel both saw giants in Canaan in the same time period. This can't be a coincidence. Most people miss this connection because Egypt didn't call their giants Nephilim. They called them Shasu. But it seems they're the same beings. I had to know if there were more sightings, so I did the dirty work. I dug through 40-page academic research papers so you don't have to. I didn't just find more sightings, I found a pattern. Not long after the flood, the Egyptians wrote a list of their enemies in Canaan. And on that list is Iy'anaq. Now that might not sound suspicious to us, but it caught the attention of scholars. That name sounds suspiciously similar to a biblical giant clan from the same area, the sons of Iy'anaq. It's the Anakim, the biblical descendants of the Nephilim. The level of fear of the Anakim was unreal. In the biblical story, they were so terrifying that battle-hardened Israelites took one look at them and said, "Nope. Nope." Think about that. What gets lost is they believed it was really God who was fighting their battles. So that means they didn't think God could beat these guys. Now that's kind of disturbing in itself, and they turned out to be wrong, but that's how intimidating the Anakim were in the ancient world. So what if Egypt saw the very same giants described in the Bible? All right, we have a decision to make. Our suspect is Iy'anaq, and we have to decide if they're the Anakim or if that name similarity is just a coincidence. It's not unusual for different countries to use slightly different spellings for different names or groups, yet keep the core word sound. It's highly suggestive that the Egyptians were writing about the Anakim when they wrote Iy'anaq. But is it conclusive? I like to think about evidence in terms of percentages. So I use the confidence scale. Do we have enough facts? How strong are they? That kind of thing. If we didn't have that first text that we looked at where Egypt described giants in Canaan, I would say the name Iy'anaq by itself is inconclusive. But because we know giants were spotted by Egypt in this area, and there are giants mentioned in that second Egyptian text later, I'm going to say my confidence is 70% that what they saw was either the Anakim or some other related giant clan. I know that might not seem like a large amount of confidence to some people, but 70%, I feel pretty good about those odds. But the oldest giant sighting after the flood is the most interesting of all, and you've probably even heard the name of this famous giant. This bloodthirsty warrior king is the reason the writers of the Bible wrote a warning about the giants at the beginning of the flood story. When the giants re-emerged after the flood, the people were heading down a dangerous path. They were obsessed with the giants. They saw them as gods. And this particular giant was said to know the secrets from before the flood. lost knowledge that humans wanted to reclaim. The giant said to carry these secrets. His name was Gilgamesh. But the writers of the Bible, specifically Genesis 6, 1-4, wanted everyone to know these guys are dangerous. They caused the flood, at least in part. He's not just a physical threat. Gilgamesh's knowledge threatens to bring the corruption from the previous world, the pre-flood world, into this new world. It could get us all killed. I had no idea that Gilgamesh was connected to the biblical giants. In high school, I thought, well, this is just some story people dreamed up because they didn't have Netflix and movies back then. I'm not saying that Gilgamesh was truly a mythical being like the one described in his stories, but he could very well have been a giant warrior like Goliath, and if the Bible has anything to say about it, he may be part angel. Gilgamesh is actually a real historical king, appearing on the Sumerian kings list, but from my research, he may be the very first giant to appear in ancient writings after the flood. He lived sometime around 2700 to 2500 BCE, and half a millennia later, the Sumerians started writing poems where he was portrayed as superhuman. Compared to the Egyptian and biblical giant stories, the Gilgamesh epic is much more fantastical. Between 1600 and 1800 BCE, the Babylonians picked up the story, and that's just a few centuries before the Egyptians and Moses wrote about the giants in the Bible. The Babylonians wrote that Gilgamesh entered a sacred cedar forest. Inside, he and Enkidu encountered an enormous divine monster, Humbaba, a godlike ogre. His face was said to have creepy lines resembling entrails. Humbaba's job was to scare men away from the sacred forest, and he was assigned to be its guardian. Humbaba attacked Gilgamesh. His mouth was fire. Gilgamesh was losing. The only chance for him to win was to get help from a god. Shamash sent a supernatural wind to immobilize Humbaba. Then Gilgamesh saw his chance. Gilgamesh had slayed a god. Now, this story doesn't flat out say Gilgamesh was a giant in those terms, but it is implied. He's portrayed as a superhuman, and one fact in this story is a dead giveaway. He was said to have at least one divine parent, just like the biblical giants. So here's our timeline. The flood takes out the giants called Nephilim. No more giants, or so it seems. Then Gilgamesh appears, and almost a millennia later, Egypt spots giants in Canaan. And around that same time, the biblical giants are spotted in the land of Canaan. These weren't the only nations with post-flood stories of giants either. The Greeks had the Titans, the Sumerians, there were the Babylonians, Hittites, and a number of others all had tales of giants, commonly seen as part divine kings. So what does all this mean? People keep asking me these burning questions. Did the Israelite spies really see giants in Canaan? Or are they just a lie because the people were afraid they couldn't beat the Canaanites in battle? I know it's a popular view that the Israelites lied, but we do have some evidence from other nations to corroborate their claims. But even more importantly, we have some evidence to corroborate the wilder claims of the Bible. Last week, a woman told me that the more unusual supernatural stories in the Bible were proof to her that it's just a book made up of stories. And she really struggles with these, and I get where she's coming from. Because I used to struggle with the giants as a topic in the Bible too. I wonder if you feel any different though now that we've found some extra biblical support. Because I really had to ask myself at one point why I felt the need to explain away the giants when I did believe in God and angels, other supernatural beings. So one day I realized, if there's actually a supernatural war going on, it makes sense that it would spill over from the supernatural world to the physical world. And to me, the giants are that spillover. If it helps, of all of the accounts of giants from around the world, the Egyptian and biblical accounts that we looked at are the most grounded accounts you're going to find. And for a skeptic, well, that means that of all the giant stories, the biblical giant stories are the least likely to have been exaggerated. Tell me what you think of the extra biblical evidence in the comments. We have a lot more research into the giants on this channel, including how they survived the flood, how tall they were really, and who really killed them. Watch this playlist next.